Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 90, recorded on December 18th, 2020. It is the first recorded conversation with David Whalen, an advocate for objectivism. In our discussion, we shared and compared concepts rather basic to our different worldviews. Some issues that we found to reflect differences were the nature of humans compared to other species, the nature and development of rationality, and the foundation of ethics. We also got somewhat into the mind body problem and the significance and meaning of consciousness. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So, I've been looking forward to our conversation. I know that you are an advocate of objectivism and have really good knowledge about it and so forth. And I thought that our comparison of our worldviews would lead to some extra depth of thought and so on. Um, how, what are your thoughts about this discussion? Uh, what are you anticipating?
Well, I'm a big believer in of humans sharing ideas. Um, we're infallible creatures. So, I mean, we're fallible. I mean, not infallible. And because we're fallible, we need to
Yeah.
constantly learn and grow. You know, and it's always good to be challenged about what we believe. We may be wrong. We may have certain things right, certain things wrong. Things need to be refined. And so I kind of look forward to that. I think there's a lot of looking over your philosophy. Um, I think there's a lot of common ground, especially at the base of it. I believe there's a lot that actually, when I was reading through a lot of what what your philosophy entails as far as the origins of man, how man, comes to find knowledge and so forth, and discovery, is very similar to objectivism. So, I think there's a lot of common ground, and then when we start to part ways, I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about as to why, and learning that way from each other.
Yes, exactly my way of looking at it. Also, uh, well, one way to begin would be maybe if you presented kind of uh, the foundation of objectivism
Okay.
as you see it, and so on. So, and then see if we uh, if there's any areas that overlap or don't overlap in our thinking about that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, of course, objectivism.
Would that
It's
work?
Yeah, that'd be fine. That's great. Yeah. Um, so I'll just start with just a brief history of it. Of course, Ayn Rand, she was the one who developed the philosophy, and it kind of comes from her own experience. She was a Russian Jew who lived before the Russian Revolution in 1917, and then lived through it. And she saw what happened as a young teenager of what had developed that caused the communist revolution to take place, what happened, and how life was during it, and how drastically it changed, and how terrible it was for her. And then her family was able to get her to America. And when she comes to America, she doesn't have anything, and she becomes a screenwriter in Hollywood. And then she starts writing novels. But she saw and she how America was, and she had heard great things about America being like the paradise of freedom compared to what she had in Soviet Russia. And but when she got here, she kind of got disillusioned that Marxist socialism was becoming sort of cheap, that it was becoming like a something interesting that maybe we should pursue as Americans. And she was like, "What are you talking about? I just left that. I don't want to go back to that. I came here because you guys don't have that." And so she then she was a philosophy major, so she really liked Aristotle's work, especially on his Nicomachean ethics and politics, because the Greeks were really big into more of a democracy, representative type government, constitutional government. And Aristotle's writings on that was really good, but also Aristotle's writings on uh, on man and individual freedom and what it means, the nature of man, and so forth. She thought was really good, and she was also uh, a student of the Enlightenment. She felt that um, religion had failed man, that it had possibly had served a purpose at one time during ancient times before science came in, how man tried to deal with the unknown and things like this, and maybe try to figure out life. But um, during medieval times and the Middle Ages and so forth, it had really become oppressive to man instead of helping man. So the Enlightenment then reached America with the founding fathers of America. So the like Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, the Constitution of the United States were a product of the Enlightenment. It was the first time where people uh, held the government accountable, and that it was a governed of the consent of the people, and this was all Enlightenment. And so what she did is she took the best of Aristotle, because Aristotle does have some errors because he was trying to figure things out. This was a long time ago. And writings from like Adam Smith and John Locke, and then our founding fathers, especially Thomas Jefferson, and our documents. And she put it all together to make um, an American, sort of, I guess you could say, an American philosophy, but a really interesting philosophy that was done in a way that I think where it kind of follows, I guess you could say, like the Bible or something. So like her novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, for example, it's kind of like reading the Old Testament, New Testament of the Bible. So they're narrative stories that have the philosophical teaching in it, just like Christians do with their Bible. They have the this narrative stories in it, but in the narrative stories they draw out their theology. But it's a good way for them to remember it by the stories. So she started out that way. Then afterwards, she started writing nonfiction, philosophical writings after that about her philosophy. But the philosophy itself, then, stemming from Aristotle, if you start at the ground level of it, is basically that humans were born um, according to our nature with a clean slate. We're not good and we're not bad. So this goes against any type of religious teachings that let's say Western Christianity has about original sin. Well, objectivism, we don't say that. We don't say man is born with an inclination to evil automatically. Man is born neutral, and that good and evil is something that man discovers as he grows and he learns from nature. So,
And by the way,
yeah,
uh, that's, I think, an important point to kind of underline. We need to get back to that because I have somewhat different ideas about that specific thing.
okay,
But go ahead.
okay. So, man then, though, has a conscience to him and a rational part of his being that we can reason with, that man can develop concepts, he can learn, he can uh, through metaphysics. Metaphysics is the reality of nature. Things that exist, and those are facts. And so uh, man then discovers these things and he creates knowledge. Now, certain men, let's take Aristotle, for example. So Aristotle, he worked on these things and he created these ideas. So now, as a human, I can read Aristotle on these ideas and I can accelerate my knowledge and then read someone else who's built on him and accelerate my knowledge. Okay. So as we go on a history, we can accelerate our knowledge. We don't have to start from scratch every time. Just like we a scientist looks at Einstein's, all his work, they can build on Einstein's work. And Einstein had already tapped into nature and discovered many things he took from other scientists before him, going back to Newton and so forth. And so we can move faster as time goes on, but we do um, have to grow in that. So basically, a really good way to think about that is that humans, we have to learn how to obey nature first before we can command it. And that is a very important thing, that reality is already there. So we can, before we could create anything within reality, we have to first learn what it is. That man can't create his own reality outside of the reality that's there. And so this doesn't mean that we know everything already. There's so much in the universe that we discover in every age. There's so much new things. And so, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't already exist. The reality exists. Man just has to keep discovering it of what's there. And so we don't create new realities. We just discover what's already there in this complex universe. But we use our reason. So man has reason. So that means man is a rational being, different from the animals. The animals go by instinct and so forth. Humans, um, we're not made that way. So we're made to think and to figure things out and to
Let me ask,
yeah,
interrupt.
yeah.
There are beginning to be a lot of issues that I think uh, would be good to explore more deeply. Uh, you are seeing a difference between humans and other species.
As yes, as far as we would say that man is created uh, with a conscience, with rational thought, a rationality that animals don't. Animals are more with uh, instinct and how they're made.
So
Uh,
we are not animals.
I would say we're a different type of species, um, because we have the ability to reason. So, as far as like the evolutionary chain and how things came to be, um, I wouldn't personally argue with that, with all the different humanoid species that have been on the earth, how Homo sapiens have come from them, or Homo sapiens uh, came into existence from certain evolutionary processes. I don't deny that. So, but I would say that the reality of it is that the human species, the Homo sapiens today, and from the time of our creation of coming into being, that we have a something different about us than the other animals, that the other species of animals that basically just have instinct.
Well, okay, we might stop here and consider an alternative viewpoint about this. It's not an absolute, it's not a dichotomy, but it's a different way of viewing, I think. Uh, uh, the during there occurred a change. There occurred the development in our species of something that is present, perhaps to a certain extent in other species, but it developed in us to such an extreme that it has made us seem like an entirely different species than any of these other, quote, animals that exist. But in point of fact, uh, the we are animals. We have all the attributes of animals. There's one thing that our species has accomplished. I mean, has well, combination has developed and accomplished, and that is the development of symbolic language, symbols, and the rules of syntax, allowing us to construct sentences so that although it is possible for chimpanzees and apes to learn sign language, and we would say that it's not true that no other species has any capability along those lines. It developed in us and has taken off to almost an infinite extent. So now, when you say that we are born, if indeed I heard you correctly, born with the ability to be rational and so on, I would not agree with that. We would first, I guess, have to clarify what we meant by rational. And what I think is that rationality is something that has developed relatively recently in the history of our species. And I don't really know how far back our species go, but you know, a million years or somewhat less, or something like that. But rationality, as I see it, is something that has developed only because of the first change. Now, that change, by the way, I regard as exponential. In other words, it began slowly and then began accelerating until it became almost infinite in extent, our ability to use symbols and the rules of syntax, and therefore to converse like we're conversing. Um, the infant does not have that capability, but it is something that the infant is able to learn, and to learn much better, faster, and to learn to a greater extent than any other species that we're aware of on this planet. Okay, so we have our first exponential change, which is simply the development of the rules of symbols and the rules of syntax. And then relatively recently, what happened was we started putting our beliefs into words, sentences. We could make statements. Um, such and such is just around the corner. or it's going to rain tomorrow, or whatever it might be. We can put those into sentences. Well, then, one of the things that we developed on top of that relatively recently is the rules of logic. And that has to do with how to create a set of sentences that are internally consistent with each other, logically consistent, where we can tell whether something, one statement contradicts another statement or does not. And so that would be the rules of logic. Rules of logic then entail like proof of a particular sentence being consistent with whatever sentences one has accepted prior to it. So that's, but that does not have anything to do with whether the sentences are correct or not. It only has to do with whether they are logically consistent with one another, whether it is an internally consistent set of ideas. But then, even more recently, we developed something else, the rules of evidence. And what that has to do with is we know that it is very easy to make a mistake, like in superstition, for instance, the belief that certain things are so, even though actually they are not. So the rules of evidence are essentially those rules that that are used and used extremely in the sciences. So that the rules of evidence then have come into existence because of the rules of logic and because of the utilization of our symbolic language. And the symbolic language has enabled two things, as I see it, and maybe there could be more general categories that have made us so different. One is the ability to have much more empathy for one another because one person can describe what it's like to be that person to somebody else. I used an example like I can tell you what I was thinking about yesterday doing tomorrow and how I feel about it and what I think you may be thinking about the way I feel about it. And the ability, for instance, I might be able to tell that you were suffering by how your facial expression, body language, and so forth, but I wouldn't know what you were suffering about, that a particular thing that happened yesterday that still bothers you, et cetera, et cetera. So, so our symbolic language has enabled much, much greater empathy. And then the second thing that it has enabled is a much greater ability to give each other instructions, i.e. to cooperate. I can tell you how to get to some distant place you've never been by just my words. And so then that with that increased cooperation, that's enabled us to do more and more things. And then especially when we got our rationality and our rules of evidence, we've been able to do amazing things like what we're doing right now with the technology and everything. So, so I'm seeing that picture as how we humans are different than all other species, but it is an emergent that is because of that original change having to do with language. So I don't see our species as endowed with rationality and so forth. I think it's something that we have developed. It's a socio-cultural change, and it's also been an exponential change. Like if we take the rules of evidence and look at science as it is today compared to 100 years ago, and then compared to 500 years ago, and so forth, you can see there's an exponential nature to that. So I see us, therefore, with a certain modification that I'll make, as talking high-tech chimpanzees, or in quotes. So we do, in our own human ways, highly sophisticated, the exact same things that chimpanzees do. And if we take just one of them, we fight. But we can fight with our technology. Um, we can cyberbully and so forth. And so there's a lot more to be said there, but I don't want to go on at too great length. But this is where, as I hear you presenting your picture of us humans being this strange species that's on Earth, not connected to others except in tiny ways, but as somehow suddenly being different. I see us as evolving psychosocially. And I also, by the way, see a third exponential change beginning to take place. And that's what I have put a label on, and that's Humanianity. And that's a change in our ethics. But we can get into that. But so I've talked at great length here. And so now it's your turn to see what you think about those, the areas that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I I understand what you're saying. I would say for us, it's a little different. Not to deny, like I said, that man has evolved over time and from different humanoid species to the Homo sapien and things, but um, I would say, let's say with rationality, so we would say that humans are born with a conscience and rationality, but that does not mean you can figure things out right away. You know, an infant, it has to grow, it has to discover, it has to be nurtured and taught. Um, that's why, like,
Taught.
mhm,
Yeah.
uh, for example, like Aristotle would say that a young child doesn't have ethics yet because it's still learning. It's gaining knowledge from a tutor or its parents or the government or something is teaching the child about ethics, what is good, what is bad, and why. And they learn, and as they grow and gain knowledge, then they can start to uh, uh, create their own ethics based upon that. But it takes place in stages. So we know, and that's evidence, when you take a little toddler, he doesn't know what a 16-year-old knows, and a 16-year-old doesn't know what a 30-year-old knows. Um, and so one other thing that was interesting is about language. So for objectivists, language was developed by man uh, to express and communicate the knowledge that they has discovered over time. And he's discovered, hey, if I communicate and say this is a table, then I can explain what a table is to another human, and then I can build concepts of that. And so, uh, just like numerals represent mathematical numbers. It's the same way with language, how we believe it. Um, but I did think that was interesting. Talked about how with humans can do evil things, and that is proven throughout history. And for an objectivist, we believe that a human can turn into a brute beast by turning off their rationality and getting outside of reality, and uh, then you're no longer human. Now you're just like a like some ravaging beast that's gonna you know do what it pleases just to hurt people or whatever. So that can happen, but we would say that's a person that's immoral because they've now gone outside of the realms of reality.
Yeah.
um,
And see, I'm seeing this, I would say, significantly differently. Um, some of it has to do with terminology,
hmm,
but I think there are also conceptual um, differences in our viewpoints. Um, One of the things that I have found, um, I think, to be helpful in improving communication in this area has to do with certain terminology. Now, what I'm talking about currently is um, well, the whole area of ethics, but broader than that, sort of like, well, what is ethics? So that's the underlying question. And I'm hearing you say that the objectivist viewpoint is that we are born with ethics, with an ethical system. But on the other hand, you do say it has to be taught. So, I would say that we were not born with it. The um, but first, uh, I wonder if we can agree upon a real basic terminology here that um, that we can have two different kinds of beliefs: existential beliefs and ethical beliefs. And existential beliefs are just beliefs about existence, what exists or has existed or is likely to exist in the future, and how it all works, and so forth. In other words, the is as opposed to the ought. And then ethical beliefs are the ought, like we should do this, they should do that, such and such should be done. And so, although the word should can be used in an existential, in the statement of an existential belief, uh, it is more likely to be used uh, to um, uh, convey an ethical belief. And its use as in an existential belief would be, according to this map, it should be around the corner. That's an existential belief. It's not an ethical belief. But we should recycle. We should watch what we say. We should be good to each other, um, or otherwise. Um, if our daughter um, leaves our belief system, we should have her beheaded. So that would still be an ethical belief. Now, the way that I am seeing this, the remember that the word should, that's in language. We can have ethical beliefs that are not at all expressed in language. And it's the same way with other species that are in any way social. Um, as a kind of an intermediate example, uh, we can teach our dog, and it can learn that I, quote, I should not get on the couch, or I should walk beside my master when my master says heel. So that is uh, the human has conveyed an ethical belief, has created an ethical belief in the dog. And within a tribe of chimpanzees, let's say, they learn when I'm around this one, when I'm around the alpha, I should do such and such. And so, you know, I should leave so that female alone because that's the alpha's female. And so this ethics of uh, what one beliefs about what one should or should not do can be does exist within um, other species than just humans that do not make use of language and do not put those ethical beliefs into words, into sentences. But we humans are able to do that. And so we can develop very complex ethical systems. Uh, Now, what that, uh, what I'm saying there is that our, um, the ethics that we, uh, the ethics that is acquired by animals, including ourselves, is created by the culture within which the individual uh, is uh, is uh, sculpted, let's say. In other words, and cultures vary. So, so that's the naturally occurring ethics, and it's primarily based upon the idea of obedience to the most powerful. So my label for it is authoritarian ethics, which would be consistent with the way I think most people would kind of understand that concept. Okay, so
Yeah.
authoritarian ethics. The only problem is that, see, the basic idea there is we should do that which X wants us to do, X being whoever or whatever is most powerful. And so that can be parent, it can be leader, it can be a culture, it can be a deity or the spokesperson for that deity, and so on. Uh, and so it has to do with obedience to authority. Uh, that is the naturally occurring ethics. We realize, though, that because nobody can agree upon who X is or what X wants, and X can be moody and non-rational and so forth, uh, that it creates all sorts of problems, conflict and everything. And it is tied in with our tribalistic nature. Chimpanzees are tribalistic, bonobos are tribalistic, great apes are tribalistic. Um, and it's the idea, you know, like if you're one of us, you obey our rules, so to speak, what you should or should not do. And if you are not one of us, then we don't have to have any empathy for you. In fact, maybe we can get you out of the way, you know, and so forth. And so chimpanzees can do something almost like genocide, and you know they go to war and everything. So, uh, so, um, um, so what I am seeing develop among us humans relatively recently is something that you have pointed out, and it is a different kind of ethics. And I've tried to put it into words, and I consider it to be like the ethics of the social contract, that within a group of individuals, the procedures, what they come to believe that they should or should not do, is worked out according to procedures that involve all of them. It's constructed by all, for all. And so that's led to the idea of democracy and things of that sort. Um, and social contract can occur to some extent between peers. Two chimpanzees can groom each other and so forth, and not engage in a struggle for dominance, but it can very easily deteriorate from that to where one has to obey the other and so on. So, so see this concept of ethics seems a little bit different than the objectivist idea, which is that well, we just happen to be ethical, and so on. I think this
Well,
explanation. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So, well, a little correction. So, objectivists, we do not believe that you're born ethical. We
Uh-huh.
believe you're born with a rationality, but it's an infantile rationality that has to grow. You're born neutral. You're born without any ethics yet.
Uh-huh.
And so man discovers, as he discovers and learns, he creates an ethic. But uh, you bring up some really good points on that. A lot of it is, for example, Aristotle would say that you couldn't define or come to a final conclusion of ethics like you could with science about things. And the reason why he was right on this, he discovered through his work that different degrees of ethics and different ethic things are what makes someone happy, for example, and morality is going to differ with different humans. That's just the way we're made, because humans were individuals, and because of that, there are things that I may like or that I may find more ethical than you may, or you vice versa, or we may agree on a certain morality, but we have different degrees about what we believe about that morality. And because of that,
How does that happen?
that happens through, well, a couple ways we would say this, that man has, because of his rationality, that man's very first ethic is survival. Man has to survive. Now, from that survival, needing to survive, he has to, man has understood he has to do certain things that work and don't work for his survival
Are we
first.
talking about the infant or the small child?
Yes, for a small child, yes. And then
The
as
small
they,
child knows about survival.
right, he feels hungry, he gets cold, he
Oh, well,
feels that
that
he has to like, and then he realizes that, you know, in his infantile, very beginning, he's not like an animal where animals have the ability to survive and things. Although, like say, baby chimpanzees need their mothers at the beginning to help them, with feeding them and so forth. A human child needs that too. But I'm talking about more in the sense of the human race.
yeah, but
Um,
let's back up for a minute, because uh, I think this is a real important difference, apparently, in how you and I think. Um, I don't believe that the small child, the 2-year old, the 3-year old, knows anything about survival, about death, about the possibility of being killed, and so forth and so on. The hunger is just hunger. It is not a fear of being killed by that virtue of not taking in food. So I don't think I don't think survival is a basic issue. In fact, it is something that the existentialists, uh, consider one of our biggest problems is that we become aware as time goes on, relatively late in our childhood. We become aware of the possibility of ceasing to exist, of not surviving. But it's not something that is inborn. Hunger is inborn, yes. So you see here where I see we diverge in at least terminology.
Well, maybe it's better to say elementary forms of survival versus more complex understanding of survival.
Well, but
Because the child's going to say, "Listen, I need something to eat.
yeah, yeah,
As long as it hurts if I don't." And
yeah.
pain is the very first understanding of survival.
Well, see, I don't. There's where place that I disagree with. I don't think pain uh, in the mind of the infant or the child, the small child, or relatively late in childhood, when pain is experienced, I don't think death or lack of survival in any way goes through the child's mind. That's something that we kind of with our language problems um, uh, create the idea that oh well the infant is strongly motivated for survival. I don't think that that exists at all. You see what I'm saying?
I would say maybe his concept of death and life and purpose or things like this, not yet. But I would say on a very, according to their stage of development, there are certain survivals, I guess, uh, uh, in a very elementary rational thought. And I would start with the pain, just that it's at a very elementary stage, according to their stage that they're at. Man needs to survive. We need to, or else you die.
Well,
But whether you realize it or not, so
well,
so yeah.
yeah, well, see that there's a problem here in that I think that we are imposing uh, something or attributing something to the child that is not there. The child, the same as the chimpanzee or the dog, can experience pain, and pain is a motivational state that motivates doing whatever will alleviate it. Um, there can be some exceptions, of course, um, but when we start attributing things like survival to infants and children, small children who don't know anything about death and about surviving and so forth, when we say that just because we know that they need food in order to not die, doesn't mean that they do, doesn't mean that there's any connection at all. There is a connection in that the child does need food, but that's a discovery that is made relatively late in life. So, so I think saying that first and foremost in us is a need for survival. It is that we have motivational states that result in behavior that indeed does promote survival to a great extent, but not always. It seems to me.
Mhm. Yeah, but you could also put it as if we just get away from the child for a moment, the child's parents then. The child's parents know that they have to survive. So you look at the human, I guess when I say that man, talking about the human species, the human race of Homo sapiens, um, if you were to overall look at our race at the different ages and stuff, and let's say from those who are now mature and those who are know things, that we do understand that we have to survive, and we know that our children have to survive
Well,
as a human species.
we don't know that we have to survive. We have a wish to survive, but uh, but some of us do not have such a wish to survive, and I think that is to a great extent influenced by the culture, like in Troy, uh, come back with your shield or on it. That losing that survival was not what was important. It was winning or dying trying, and so on. So again, I think that that's culturally determined.
Right, but then you have to ask yourself, just because it was culturally determined, does that mean that that's how humans are? So, for example, uh, you look at Plato and his work on the Republic. Plato believed that it was important for the government to teach the people justice, and that justice is what developed the ethic. Um, but that would mean that the people could decide for themselves what they liked and didn't like. It would have to be the government, the philosopher kings, telling them what is right and what is wrong, what is just and what is unjust. And then you better hope that these philosopher kings are actually just men. And then the question is, well, what's just and what's unjust? If you got higher authoritarians telling you that this is the ethic that you have to believe, Aristotle then saw that that was wrong, that humans aren't geared that way. That humans, we aren't, it's not good for an authoritarian uh, regime or government or group or whatever, leaders to decide what is ethical and unethical for the individual person because it differs amongst other people. It, it, it it's not all the same. And what if it's wrong, right? So, for example, Plato, even when he talks about in the Apology with Socrates, he's on trial for something he didn't do wrong. He got set up. But when he's asked to try to escape, one of his followers says, "We got a plan to get you out of here and we can escape to another city or things like this." He won't do it. And he makes this famous statement. He says, I'm not a victim of the law, I'm a victim of man. That these authoritarians they were corrupt and they're the ones who are misusing the law against me to unjustly convict me of this crime. But I'm not going to break the law because the law actually is not wrong. It's the men who created these things, these laws and stuff that's wrong. It's these men that I disagree with, not with the law of Athens. So Aristotle sees the error in this, and he comes in, I guess you would say, more of a bottom up concept that man is a creature that um, is made to pursue happiness. But this happiness can be different things. Um, but this is part of it goes beyond survival. This is now what does man want to pursue in his life? What's going to make him happy? And this happiness isn't like something you at the end. It's an ongoing thing. It's what you're, like he would say, your actions that you're doing they create this happiness. And so this happiness then is what each individual should be able to have the freedom to do. And but because each individual has their own happiness, they can't take that happiness away from another individual, nor should their happiness be something that they, because someone could say, well, my happiness is killing people. Well, then they would say, no, that's wrong because now you're invading someone else's, you're taking away someone else's happiness by killing them. You can't do that. But this then would be a bottom up form of government. So Aristotle say you still need government, you need order in the earth, but it has to begin with the individual first and their pursuit of their happiness and then moving up. So,
Okay. Now, by the way, I am not following you at this point.
okay. All right.
I'm,
I got.
uh, and I think uh, it it has to do with our different kind of basic belief systems, and also terminology. Plus, uh, I did learn a lot of philosophy early in my life, but
Okay.
I'm kind of forgotten much of it. And one of the things uh, to keep in mind is, and you're doing a good job of that, is in making reference to previous figures, philosophical figures. You are explaining what they believed and so forth. And because we can't assume that somebody viewing this knows what Aristotle believed and so on, but you're doing a good job of presenting that.
Right.
But so we need, as I said, I was beginning not to be able to follow what you were saying.
Okay.
I'm
So,
worried. I'm worried that maybe the same thing has happened when I was talking. Have you had that experience where, as I was talking, something that I said just uh, you could not follow me? It didn't make sense.
no, I understand what you're saying. I think we're talking about the nature of humans, our
Yeah.
nature.
Uh-huh.
And so I guess what I'm saying is then as an objectivist, uh, the nature of man is not it's more rational, I guess, than your starting point with man, where man's more animal, from what I'm understanding. I may be wrong on this. And so maybe that's the difference where we have a different idea of man that
Okay.
and so our understanding of the nature of man is more rational, although we understand as an infant and toddler, you grow up, you got to go through stages of development, but you are able to develop. Now, what I was getting at with
One thing. Let me
yeah,
interrupt. Uh, I have the feeling that when you use the word rational, it means something a little bit different than when I use it.
it's it's um it's another word, I guess you could say, inborn into humans is a consciousness that we have. Um,
You mean that other species are not conscious?
no, other species are kind of humans. We have our own, according to our species, we have a consciousness that Homo sapiens that we have. We just have it. Um, um,
No, I'm sorry. Say it again. Uh,
so
do we have a consciousness that chimpanzees do not have?
they have their own, and we have our own.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, we're a Homo sapien. They're a primate. We're different.
That's just how we've labeled them.
Yeah.
That's prior to zoology and that sort of thing. There wasn't such a thing. So um, Yeah, I guess one area of difference of opinion between the two of us, and by the way, I would say that yours is much more the normal. Uh, uh, I I think that my way of viewing things uh, is uh, is not normal. uh, some would be accepting of it, but some would not. And of course, some of the religious views would say that, well, man is born with a soul, whereas others are not, and there's stuff like that. But I see a newborn infant human and a newborn infant chimpanzee as being almost this, being essentially the same, except that the human is has already developed more prefrontal cortex and has more capability of uh, development, can go further, much further in certain areas, but that the small child behaves like the small chimpanzee, and part of parenting is um, teaching the child, no, you don't throw your food. No, you don't hit your baby brother. Uh, that's wrong. Um, and of course, that will be different for different families, different parents, and so on. Um, so, um, and what that is caused by is something that exists with all the higher animals, and that's positive and negative reinforcement. In other words, when a particular behavior uh, occurs and it is followed by certain kinds of feedback, uh, then it will increase the likelihood or decrease the likelihood of that behavior occurring. Instrumental conditioning, for instance. So, so I I don't see us humans as being all that different from chimpanzees and apes and so on, uh, as except in our capabilities in certain areas, language, and then science and technology. But we do the same things with those tools uh, that chimpanzees do. Chimpanzees use their teeth, and we use our weapons and our money and stuff like that. Um, so, uh, so it seems like we do have a different view uh, of us humans. We certainly look different than any other species, and that makes it possible for us to say, well, they are just animals, but we humans, there's something uh, basically different from us. And I think it's not basically different, uh, but that these that first exponential change of symbolic language made us drastically different in how we behave, um, and then on top of that, the second exponential change, the rules of logic and the rules of evidence, or rationality, uh, has uh, made the second exponential change. We're in the middle of it now, and we wonder, where it's going to go from here. So I see that as a basic difference um, between your view and mine.
Right.
I see us very much as animals that have these unusual capabilities, and you see us as something different from animals uh, in that we are born with what I'm hearing you say, born with things which I say we're not born with. We're born with the capability of developing them later in life, but we're not born with them. We're not born with conscience. We're not born with language. We're not born with uh, ethics. Um, by definition, ethics is the molding of our behavior by the culture that we are surrounded by, uh, and that is throughout life, but especially in early life when the basics are learned.
Right. So yeah, so like I said before, so as far as the ethics go, I would agree with you. We're not born with ethics; those are developed. Where we differ, then I guess, is that we believe that humans are our superior species on this earth. That we are born with a conscience and reason, and that reason is volitional. It's not determined or non-volitional. It's a we have choice, and then of course, though, you're not automatically as an infant. Your reason isn't the same reason as a 30-year-old man. It has to be developed. It grows, but it grows with you. Now, where it differs from religions, where religions would say you have a soul, and then you have your human body, you have your brain and your organs and so forth like this, and the soul inhabits the body and turns it on in a sense and runs it, but it's a separate thing from the body. Even though it can be together, it can also separate. Where we don't, as objectivists, we don't agree with that. We believe that the rationality and your conscience is connected. It's who you are as part of your body. When you die, it dies with you. When you live, it's alive with you. It doesn't go away. It doesn't separate from you. It's who you are. It's who we are as a species. It's the way we're made. Um,
And I'm pretty much in agreement with that. I know that there are others who believe differently, and that there's such a thing as reincarnation and stuff like that. And there are efforts to scientifically demonstrate it, but uh, to my knowledge, uh, well, obviously, the scientific community has not said, yeah, the studies have demonstrated that essentially uh, almost beyond doubt. I don't hear that at all. Um, but I think it's still an open question.
yeah,
And some of what you're talking about, by the way, is what I refer to, well, is related to the mind body problem when you're talking about consciousness. And, there are all sorts of problems associated with if you believe in the existence of consciousness, then that's a supernatural belief because it's nowhere in the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and so forth. There's nothing about the mind, nothing about consciousness, nothing about uh, thoughts and feelings and stuff like that. Um, so those are supernatural beliefs that we just automatically have, and that's a very difficult problem. My second book, I've written three, and they're all free on the website. Um, the second book is on the mind body problem and free will versus determinism. And it would be great if you were to read that and give me some feedback on it.
yeah. To take a look at that. You said that was your second book.
Yeah,
The second book.
it's under philosophy. If you go to humanianity.com and click on philosophy, you'll see the books in various formats.
Okay. Yeah. So Yeah, so that's where I guess you would say, I guess for us, it's, you talk about logic and evidence.
Mhm.
And so for us, we emphasize a lot of metaphysics, that we look at the metaphysics of nature, and from that evidence, what exists is what we believe in. If there's no proof of it, then we can say either we haven't discovered it yet,
Mhm.
or it is outside the realm of reality. And so until it is proven, you really can't uh, say it is a fact of existence. And of
What
course, like you, yeah.
it? What the it is a factor. What is it? It.
What what do you mean, like the
You
oh
said.
well, like the fact of something. Let's say like you said, reincarnation exists.
Uh,
Like people who say that exist. Well, we have no proof of that yet. We don't have
mhm.
any fact of it. It's not a fact. So because there's no evidence of it, you can't prove it, then we would say that it's just basically a belief of faith. But belief and faith in something that there's no proof of, it remains just faith and belief. Then, as objectivists, we would say that it's not a fact of existence, and to believe it would be out of the realm of reality, and
Yeah.
that can be it can be dangerous. It can lead to things that just or sidetrack a human from being what they should be doing and spending their time on doing instead. Um, and that's with any kind of mythology, I would say, um, that it basically you're just putting a faith in something, but faith isn't fact. That's why it's called faith. Um,
Yes, and I understand, and this is a a normal way of thinking and so on. Uh, I think that uh, when most of what we do is on the basis of our beliefs that have nothing to do with scientific studies and so forth. Um, you go into the next room uh, because of your belief that your wallet is in there. And there's no scientific study that has anything to do with that belief. Um, there are some problems uh, with regard to the word faith, but the the way that it has very frequently been used, and the way that I think you're using it, and is faith is belief in the face of no evidence or evidence to the contrary. Now, then you get into the problem of what is meant by evidence. And so a lot of evidence in your personal life uh, is, it has nothing to do with scientific studies. Um, and then there's uh, the idea that faith represents trust. I have faith that my surgery will work out okay, or this person is faithful to me. I have faith that this individual is faithful to me, and so on. So the term kind of uh, bleeds at around the edges, or um, um,
Well,
so.
I think I see what you're saying, and I think what would help maybe clear this up is that the things you're talking about having faith in are faith in things that exist. So, for example, if I have faith that for example, like you said, like the surgery is going to go well for me. Okay. Now, that kind of faith is that we know that there's such a thing as surgery, and there's just surgery's been performed before. The real doctors in real life are going to do this to you. You're 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 hoping that this is going to work out, but you're hoping in something that's real. You're not hoping that fairies live on the moon. Okay. It's because we have no evidence of that's not reality. But we do know that these doctors that do this type of surgery exist, and that you're going to go through it with your real body. Um, and so that is different from um, trusting in something that there's no um, evidence for even like if I think, man, did I leave my wallet in the other room? Well, my wallet's real. It really exists. The other room really exists. So it's not the same thing. So I'm talking about things that we don't um, have proof of. As objectivists, we would say that you know with us, we look at metaphysics as this exists, A equals A, 2 + 2 = 5. These are things that we know that are in the universe and in our earth, and they exist. So we believe in existence. Um, and so it does go against religious people of all types who believe in any type of mythologies of things that they believe to be true, but there's no evidence of it. So we would say it isn't true, um, and
Well,
that's
yeah, I have a challenge for you. Uh, does consciousness exist?
yes,
How do you know?
the same way logic exists,
That doesn't answer a question.
because we're doing it right now. Our consciousness right now is what's our reasoning is what we're doing. It's not just a bunch of atoms exploding in our brain right now that's making us reason and talk about these things, and to think about the deeper things, and think about how to uh, evaluate each other's philosophy and certain topics. We're doing it by our reason, which is
Uh,
it's there. And
well,
that's the evidence of it. So like laws of logic, you can't see laws of logic, but we know that laws of logic, there's a the reason why they're called laws is because even though you can't see laws of logic, they can be applied, they can be broken, and it's not good to break them because it leads to irrationality, but they're there as well. But they're in you can't see it, but the evidence is there
what evidence?
because
Let me try to clarify it better. Do you agree that consciousness has never been observed?
I would say consciousness has been observed by what we're doing right now.
You think that you are observing consciousness?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
by by what the effects of a consciousness.
No, but I mean, do you observe it? Can you see it? Can you, your
No,
conscious?
But you can't see gravity either, but it exists.
Okay, uh, so the existence of consciousness uh, is different than gravity because you and I and anybody else can uh, point to something and agree upon what we are observing, the results of measurements and so on. But consciousness, um, this is a very tricky subject, and it has to do with the mind-body problem. But no one has ever observed consciousness. Um, and I have a way of demonstrating that, which is not highly convincing, but should clarify somewhat. Um, we could take a portion of consciousness, just the visual field, and we could close one eye and leave the right eye open. And I could say, now, can you observe your visual field? And chances are you might say yes. And I would say, well, what is its shape? If you can, if you can observe your visual field, you can tell me what its shape is. Well, you might say it is a circular disc. Does that sound like something you might say?
Yeah.
Okay, now, the in truth, the shape of your visual field is that of a donut. There is a hole in the middle, but you can't see it. You can demonstrate its presence. You can hold your hand out. Uh, if you right eye open, holding your hand out and looking and extending your hand so that you're seeing the back of your hand and your fingers apart, and look at your thumb, and you cannot see your little finger. And but you can't see the hole there. So, uh, so I believe you also cannot see the boundary of your visual field. You can't see what's on the other side of the visual field, on the other side of the boundary. Um, so that is a I think that somewhat demonstrates that we cannot see consciousness. We can't see any boundary of it. You've never observed someone else's consciousness. You may have a feeling like there's somebody there and so forth, that's just a feeling inside of you. You're not actually observing their consciousness. They can't observe your consciousness, and you can't observe your own consciousness. Um, Now, interestingly, what people say is, well, but consciousness does exist. It's not supernatural because one day science will have it explained. You can say exactly the same thing about God or any other supernatural belief. You can say, well, uh, we can't demonstrate it now, but there's always the future. See, so that's kind of a sideline here, uh, but so I of course have questioned some things that you have not yet questioned, um, and I have come up with somewhat different answers uh, than the answers that you have derived from objectivism and from your own thoughts about it and so on. I don't know whether you agree with completely everything that objectivists agree with, or whether you have some disagreements.
Um, no, I like it, and I feel that out of all the different philosophies that I've read and studied and looked at, um, I believe like um, very similar to what you were talking about when we first started our conversation, how philosophies evolve over time. You know, you put it different way, different stages that we've existential stages that man is growing into, and I agree in that same way. I believe that philosophers over time in different ages have uh, made an attempt to try to explain reality, try to explain meaning, humans, everything, the universe, purpose, everything, and some make errors, some are really good, and but I think the ones that we found were good is that it matched the best of the reality of the way the world works and the way humans, our nature is. And then others built on that and improved it. And and then as we learn more and more and more like that. So objectivism, why I like it is because it is an offspring of the Enlightenment. I believe the Enlightenment was where man really jumped far ahead in his rationality and reason, and got away from the dark ages and the the teachings that were holding mankind back. And so I I I like the idea of, I guess you could say it is taking the best out of one aspect of philosophy. Now that's where others may disagree. For example, um, when you read Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, you read a lot of Plato. Okay, but when you read Ayn Rand, you're seeing a lot of Aristotle, and Aristotle was total opposite of Plato in their thinkings. Um, and so that doesn't mean that over time um, people don't take a certain avenue of philosophy. So the reason why I like objectivism is that how I've seen things worked out, how I see uh, man thrive under certain philosophies. I believe that mankind would thrive the best under this philosophy, or at least for myself. I really like it, and so I practice it. I live it out,
Mhm.
and I've seen those who also are objectivists. It's a really good philosophy of life. Um, but you know, like you said, like what we're doing right now, it's a matter of just talking these things through and thinking about them. Because, for example, if let's say if let's say I started out as a Christian and I was a Western Christian and I had certain ideas about God and the Bible, and this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm supposed to believe. Um, it would be very hard for me to be taught otherwise unless
Mhm.
I decided, listen, I really need to make sure that what I'm believing in is true. Then
Mhm.
I need to open myself up to doing what we're doing right now. So what I like is what we're doing right now,
Mhm.
and we may not budge each other from our views, but I think the most important thing is in this is that we can appreciate our views, even where they differ, to understand, well, how does Bill, he's not just saying this, there has to be a reason why he's saying this. And then learning why you say that will help me appreciate it more. And then maybe I'll say, that's a good point. That's a good point. I may not agree with it right now, but it's a good point and something I need to look into. Because we know, like I said, humans, we're not infallible. We make mistakes. And and therefore we need to keep learning. I think it's wrong to stop learning, and to stop evaluating our own philosophy of life. to make sure that we don't have it wrong, because
Yeah.
we might be out.
Yes, you and I are very much in agreement with regard to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have some little differences at the starting point of man. I think that, on the other hand, I think that we both would agree that uh, possibly mythology would not be a good source for mankind to uh, follow, as far as this is the way that life is, this is the way we have to be, um, in the sense of guiding us and telling us what we have to believe in, what we have to do. Um, but I think also the difference is where um, our view of humanity, of humans, our nature is different, on that. But I think that what some of the things that are similar, though, is mankind, or whether you believe in the consciousness or not, but the rationality part, and using logic to figure things out, and evidence. Um, as far as epistemology, that's exactly what objectivists we hold to. You got to have evidence for it, and we use our rationality to figure it out and develop concepts and knowledge, and then the ability to explain that knowledge in language and writing and so forth, like this. Um, and then by using logic, we can do a validation of whether something is true or not. So if someone tells me 2 + 2 = 5, well, that we know logically that doesn't happen. It's impossible. You can try it many different ways, but it's not going to equal 5. And
2 + 3? You said 2 + 3.
I said 2 + 2 = 5.
Maybe I didn't hear
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah. I meant 2 + 2 = 5. If someone said 2 + 2 = 5, it defies the laws of logic. It defies. Then for us, what's interesting with us, it's um, what makes things a little different is we spend a lot of focus on being in reality, and those things and ways of thinking that are outside of reality. And our ethic is partially built upon that idea. Um, um, and so, but that goes back to our understanding of humans, the way we believe that humans are from the beginning.
Yeah, and there is a potentially problematic term that you're using, and that is reality. Um, I, I, I think you and I are in agreement pretty much about what it means, but there are those who say, well, there's your reality and there's my reality. And so there's no absolute truth and so on. And so so discussing it is probably not going to be profitable. And let's go have a beer. And I don't agree with that. That's the postmodern um, kind of deterioration in thinking that occurred when the pragmatists attempted to deal with the issue that the logical positivists could not um, demonstrate that there was something that absolute truth that could be known to be absolute truth. But that gets into a bunch of other stuff. In the Mind Body Problem book, that the issue of reality is very closely addressed, and so on.
Yeah, well, that's a very good, that's a big topic with us, because with objectivism, um, that's what we're opposite of subjectivism, where people can just choose what is truth and what is not truth based on a whim. And we would say that would be immoral. That uh, choosing truth and making truth really isn't truth at all. It's that then you could just make up anything you wanted to make up and say, well, this is true, so now this is what we got to believe. And we feel that's harmful. That truth has to be objective. It has to be objectively looked at.
Yeah, and I, although my terminology would be somewhat different, I believe you and I are very much in agreement about that. The terminology that I would use would be that with regard to our existential beliefs, if they have anything to do with the quality of our life, then the accuracy of those existential beliefs is extremely important. And now, there are existential beliefs that maybe are not of that sort, but actually benefit a person. And we do know that some people are benefited by the belief in a loving God and reunion with family and so forth after death. That makes for a better life for those people. And it may be that if it doesn't lead to things like, well, if it doesn't extend to, but you've got to please God, and you please God by making sure that if your daughter leaves the faith and you kill her, then obviously that is not a beneficial uh, belief to have. That um, is outside of what we would consider reality. Uh, but well, I sense that uh, I observe, I believe that there are areas that you and I can explore much more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yes.
and um, so I'm hoping that you have some wish to have further discussions and where we can hone in on specifics.
Yeah, I think we can talk a little bit more about the consciousness. Um, get drill down a little more deeper on that. Share ideas on that. Um, and then I think maybe one of the things I think that is very important is how ethics or morality is formed amongst humans, because this is a big issue, like you said today, especially with the postmodernists. Um, Ethics has become, I think, a blurred thing, and people are doing harmful things and have harmful ideas um,
Yeah,
that are kind of scary today that shouldn't be there. And I think there's a way to look at that. And I think objectivists, we have uh, the way we talk about values and ethics, I think is a safe way for humans, where humans could flourish and humans could get along better with one another. Um, you know, uh, and uh, and I think that I think maybe we could talk a little bit more about that as well. I think that'd be a
yeah,
good topic next time too.
yeah. Uh, and I think that uh, a a good or maybe best way of formulating the question uh, having to do with ethics um, is, quote, what is the foundation of ethics?
Mm.
And by that, um, I would mean that, let's say you say that you should do such and such, or that I should do such and such. So the question then can be asked, well, why? you can be asked to legitimize your statement, to indicate why. And of course, what people assume, and I think that you assume, I'm not 100% sure on that, is that there is a foundation for ethics. That, for instance, you do not believe that ethics is that which is demanded by a God. Um, now, what I'm hearing, or I think I have heard, is that you believe that ethics is a determinable thing by appropriate study of, quote, nature, that it is inherent in nature. And I would very much disagree with that. In other words, that there are some things that are right or wrong, and that's absolutely true and can be demonstrated from a study of nature. And that I would not be accepting of that uh, position. So most people would label me as a moral relativist, and they would say, well, so you're free then to go and pillage and rape and murder because you have nothing to tell you, absolutely what's right and wrong. And I don't agree with that portrayal of relativistic morals. So that's an area that we could probably explore profitably.
Yeah. So little different. We don't believe that per se. Well, you wouldn't say that ethics is in nature. We would say that ethics is what man finds by living in nature, but he creates it. And this ethics then is for his survival and is for his because part of mankind is understanding you can't get along by yourself. You need others, and then societies are created. And so man then says that in order to cooperate and live with other humans, um, we have to we have to be able to do that without killing each other. We have to, and so we create out of our reason an ethic, but this ethic, not that it comes from nature, but that we would say that it matches the way nature works. You create an ethic that will work. And so that's why objectivists, we always say that um, before you can command nature, you have to obey it first. And that's a really simple way, but it's a really good, I think, a profound statement of how we believe how that would work.
Yeah, I see us being very close to agreement. There are some fuzzy areas, and um, um, one of the um, well, I have a metaphor, well, an analogy that kind of describes it. Let's say you and I and maybe a few other people are having a social event pre-pandemic, and uh, and so I say, I have an idea. Let's go to Carowinds. And everybody else says, yeah, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Okay, well, okay, then let's plan to do that. Now, who should drive? Who should bring the food? Who should do this? Who should do that? When should we meet? Where should we meet? Etc. Now, all of those shoulds, see, are ethical beliefs, and they're dependent on having that goal. Okay, now, all we have to do to understand humanianity is to understand what that goal would be and to recognize that it's just a preference. But the goal, what we would be trying to accomplish would be that we should do that which will not only promote the survival of our species, but as much joy, contentment, and appreciation as possible, and as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death as possible for everyone now and in the future. So that would be the ultimate ethical principle, and it would be just produced by saying, "Yeah, well, that's the goal that I want. How about you?" And so some people would disagree with it, and there would be other ultimate ethical principles. The one that I cite is, we should do that which will promote the greatest diversity of species on this planet. And of course, what that would mean is that we need to get rid of one species, namely ourselves. But I don't think most people would go for that. I would not. We indeed should promote diversity of the species, but we, at the expense of our own demise, no, I would not accept that. And so it's arbitrary. It is just a matter of, yeah, I like that. And then our ethics can be consistent with that, logically consistent, rationally consistent. So rational ethics with the Humanian ultimate ethical principle would be the new ethics that is beginning to emerge in our species and has produced things like democracy and so forth, and a concept of human rights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's so the foundation of ethics there is arbitrary. It is whim, you could say, but there is not. We cannot, I would say, do better than that. If what we want to do is to have as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death as possible, and as much joy, contentment, and appreciation, and keep our species alive. So
Yeah. No, that's, I understand. Ours is objectivist, it's going to be a little different.
yeah,
In similar, some ways it's the same. So we would say that ethics, well, I'll start at the end of it. First, ethics is our everyday actions, not the end goal. Ethics is not the goal. What value is our goal? So values are things that we want to gain and then keep once we have it. But ethics are the means by which we can gain value and keep the value that we gain.
yeah. Well, and that sounds like ethics is that set of things that we should do in order to accomplish that goal.
Precisely. So if it's basically like in our, like the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness.
Mhm.
Happiness is not the end goal; it's the pursuing it, and it is the everyday happiness of it. It's and so
I
we
didn't
would.
know that.
the pursuit of happiness. So happiness itself doesn't mean that you have to wait until you get it to be happy. You're during the pursuit of it. It's kind of the same thing. While you're pursuing happiness, uh, you can be in a state of happiness by pursuing it. It's part of your happiness can be the everyday things that you're doing as you constantly pursue it. Um, but um, and then the great thing is, and now we get to diversity. So objectivists were really big on this. We follow a lot of Aristotle's teachings on this. Is that so happiness and values are going to be different for different people.
Yeah,
Not everyone's going to be the same. This is what we have against religious teachings and uh, government totalitarian teachings, is because not one human is the same. We have general things that are the same, but then there's other things about us, what makes us happy. It's not going to be the same.
that's right. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not sure you're presenting this as kind of a place where we are in some disagreement, but it's not at all clear what the disagreement is, because well, some of the problem I think has to do with terminology.
Yeah.
What does happiness mean? That
Right.
sort of thing.
Right. So I think I think where we would, as far as that part, I think we're the same. We're very close
Mhm.
with the ideas of it. I think where we would part ways is with objectivists. Then we say, okay, what then um, would be value, and then what would be the ethics to get this value, and how do you know that it's not immoral? And so that's where we hold more to the Enlightenment ideas of individualism, that humans are individuals, and that the values that we obtain and that we create belong to us, and that they don't belong to anybody else, and that others to take it from us by force or any other way, that is immoral. So individual rights then is, in a sense, well, it is for us, individual rights is the morality for all humans, but the values and the ethics are up to that individual, but they cannot uh, violate. And what I mean violate doesn't have to be by force, by other means, but it cannot violate those individual rights of another human.
Interfere with, yeah. Mhm.
So, and then because once you interfere with, so someone could say, um, well, I like to beat women. Well, we would say, was injustice. That's wrong, because a woman has a right to her life. She has a right to happiness, and you beating her is taking away her happiness and then potentially taking away her life and not giving her a bad life. So you can't do that. That would be immoral. But if, let's say, a controversial subject in America, gay marriage, let's say two men who are in love with each other want to get married, we would say if they're not violating anybody's rights and they're consenting adults and no one's being forced.
Yeah. Well, going back to the first, if the woman is a masochist and enjoys, uh, enjoys some degree of violence and so forth, then maybe that would make a difference. But
Yeah.
um, what I'm going to suggest is that we could bring our discussion to a close now. We've got some to think about. And plan. You're going to be away next week, so
Maybe after Christmas, the week after Christmas.
week after Christmas. Well, we'll contact each other
Okay.
and figure it out.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna take a look at your book on the mind body issue, and I think the consciousness issue is something we could really drill down and get a little more detail and focus on that, and along with maybe the foundation of ethics that we get a
Yeah.
little more into that too.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great.
All
Well,
right.
I really appreciated and enjoyed our discussion.
Same
Uh,
here.
it's really great to be able to talk with somebody who, wants to drill down and understand things at a deeper level and so on.
All right.
Okay, well, then you have a good Christmas, and we will get back together the week after Christmas.
All right. You do the same. Thanks, Bill. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Humanity.